Okay, I want to jump right in. It is really an absolute privilege and pleasure to be sitting here with members of the Jacobson family, with Mrs. Sylvia Jacobson. Your Hebrew name is
Tzivia
Jacobson, and her incredible son, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, they actually pronounce it many different ways.
Many
But
different ways.
That's good.
We do a series every year before Pesach, before Passover, really when people are thinking about our familial connections, our familial bonds. And like any family, but I think what makes unique about this family is the generational gaps that exist in a family and how every generation is really navigating a different world and how those worlds compare and how they contrast. And I wanted to begin our conversation by setting up the stage of what world you emerge from. I'm going to begin with Mommy Dearest, Mrs. Jacobson. Where were you born and when were you born?
I was born Tammuz 14, 1935, July 14th. I was born in a city called Kutaisi, which is in Georgia, Kafkaz, Russia, in the Caucasus, near the Caucasus Mountains, to a Chabad family.
And it was an observant family in Russia.
Observant family, totally living. I would say when I brought up my own children, that my mother brought us up in Russia the same way I brought up my children here in America. As far as in the morning that you wash your negelwasser, you say Moeda'ani, you make brachas on food, and so on. So we were really brought up as Chabad Chassidim.
Chabad Chassidim through and through.
In Kutaisi.
Rav Simon, where were you born? When were you born?
December 8th, 1956, the 5th of Tevis, Tafshin Yud Zayin, which would be 5717, born right here in Crown Heights, USA, New York, to my beautiful parents, who were both Russian-born, and I'm the oldest of 5 children. And being I don't like labels so much, I don't like to define what kind of family I was brought up in. My mother already defined that. She sees it. I like to think myself of a international citizen. And however, a soul that God sent to this world, and I ended up what I call a baby boomer. And
in that generation. That's the generation of my parents as well. And I wanted to begin with a very... I wouldn't call it a basic question, but what I think is one of the most interesting differences generationally, and that is how we deal and relate to mental health and specifically trauma. And I'm curious, you grew up in a world, Mrs. Jacobson, where the Jews were legitimately persecuted. You felt persecution growing up. Is that true?
As children, it was difficult to say that we felt persecution. We only heard things that were happening. But the parents, of course, felt persecution. They were in danger all the time. As a religious Jew, you were in danger literally 24/7. They could come to you in the middle of the night and take you away and never to be seen again.
Did you know people when you were growing up who were taken away, never to be seen again?
Yes, we did. That we did. We would say, oh, Shmuel never came back. I knew there was something happened. But, as a child, you don't feel that you're being persecuted.
Did you have non-Jewish friends in Russia?
Of course, mostly Georgian, because this is Georgia that I was born in. So it was Georgian people,
but
Jews and non-Jews.
Well, when you were leaving Russia to come to the United States of America, you're a young child. You're not getting on a first-class flight and an airplane to come over here. That journey must have been incredibly harrowing, even from a child's eyes. Did you not feel like you were experiencing trauma as you were leaving your home and making your way through Russia to finally come back to the United States?
I have to tell you that I felt that my parents had this real pressure, but they made us feel always like loved and protected. Wherever we were, we traveled by cattle cars from Czechoslovakia to Vienna. And to us, it was, again, the parents made, my mother especially, my father as well, just made us feel so protected that I personally do not remember any trauma at all.
That is so interesting, and I really
I can't believe it myself.
meaning this is a generation that is in the shadow of the Holocaust, that in Russia the Jewish community had to live underground, and you essentially had to, as a child, flee your childhood community and come to the United States, and you feel that you didn't really grow up feeling that you had experienced childhood trauma.
Yeah, let me just give you a little bit of a picture of at home in Russia, Kutaisi, where we were. My mother would teach us from a very young age, the Aleph Bey. We learned how to daven at a very young age. At five, I knew how to daven. I knew how to read fluently from the Siddur. And every single night she would put us to sleep with stories about Baal Shem Tov and so on. And finally she would say something that I never heard anybody else do. The Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, lived in America at that time. And my mother would say every single night, der Rebbe soll helfen mir sich sehen mit den Rebben. Hashem should help us to see the Rebbe. I'm thinking, where did she get it from?
God should help that we should be able to see the Rebbe. Because you'd never seen the Rebbe.
Never saw a Rebbe, never saw a picture of a Rebbe. And the possibilities were like us going to Venus right now. And yet, that hope and that promise, I think that's helped us to really live in I would say maybe a bubble.
So I'm curious through your eyes, you're a child growing up at home and you have parents who are both Russian immigrants and they're coming in and you're growing up into this world that's now in the shadow on the other end of the Holocaust. When you were growing up, did you have any sense of what your parents experienced? Did you feel that you grew up in a home where your mother insists, I didn't grow up in a home where my parents had any trauma. That's how your mother sees it. Did you feel that you grew up in a home where the experience of Russia and running out actually still loomed? You could still sense that maybe it was being protective, maybe it was... Did you feel that you were able to emote or experience a trauma from your parents?
No, absolutely not. My father, I should qualify, had a little different experience than my mother because his father was arrested and he was a little child. So it would be interesting if my father was sitting here, what he would say about that night.
When his father was taken away and arrested.
Taken away, and then taken away meant you're probably never going to see him again. And he was a little boy, and his mother was 27 years old, I think, he was telling me. And every night and every day she would cry and she would try to find out where is he. He did survive, by the way. He ended up in Siberia. So, but I don't want to speak for my father, but if my father was sitting here, I think he would say, very similar to my mother, I wasn't traumatized because there was some type of resilience that they had. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was just a very nurturing environment. And I'm comparing it to today.
Yeah,
today, someone gets bullied in school, they're already traumatized for life. And I'm not minimizing that.
For sure.
But trauma today has a very different meaning than
That's
trauma
what I'm
then.
trying to get to. What I'm trying to understand.
I know exactly. That's why I want to say.
Yes.
So I grew up in a home. Let me just first... My home was idyllic. It was beautiful. I only have warm memories. Both my father and my mother. Loving. No one ever spoke bitterly about the enemies, about the communists, about the Nazis. When I would talk to my father about his own history, and he was 19 years old, he no longer had parents, mind you. My mother, thank God, her parents lived. They came to America. They came to Toronto, my father's parents, and they died 1953 and 1955, respectively, or 54.
He was still young himself.
He was 19. Yeah. He had two little baby brothers. So this is, you talk about trauma.
Yeah.
But my father never experienced. My father was a very, I know what children of Holocaust survivors are. I deal with
Yeah.
many of them. With my father, completely never felt. If you knew him, you did not know that he went through such a life.
Did you?
He was a successful journalist. He was driven. He was always forward thinking, very positive, optimistic, to crazy lengths. Like there was no such thing. I never saw fear in him. But I asked my father once. He said to me, we lived in fear 24/7 because they can come to arrest you, as my mother mentioned, anytime. But the truth is, I never even asked him, so why don't you have any fear in your life? But he didn't have fear. He lived around fear. I put it this way. I think that trauma was around them, but they never were defined by it. And they never allowed it to, contaminate them.
Do you have clear memories of your parents talking to you about your emotions, about your mental health? Was that something that people would speak about, to make sure, are you okay?
No, there was no such talking, because you know what? It wasn't necessary, because we really brought up in a very normal kind of an environment in the home.
You told me something really beautiful about why is it that the foundation of Jewish unity, you told me an idea, quoting from the Rebbe, derives from Jewish mothers.
Right.
Because you said you wanna share the idea.
Yeah.
I found it so remarkable.
So should I repeat that?
Sure, please.
Okay, so what a mother does for her family is that she takes every single child for who they are, give them total unconditional love. So did we have to talk about how did you feel emotionally? We never needed to talk about it because we lived. I think we were being.
And
we
you
were
always-
not experiencing life. We were living life.
It's so remarkable because it's a perspective that I feel like is somewhat lost today, which is when you have that unconditional love, you're able to have a self-confidence that prevents that sense of competitiveness, adversarialness, jealousy. It's the bedrock of unity, first having that self-acceptance. But
Go ahead. I know you want to.
No,
I'm smiling because I want to weigh in here.
Yeah.
What you have there is no self-consciousness. The self-consciousness that people experience today is a tremendous problem. Right away, I'm in pain, so I got to talk about my pain. I got to feel it. And that's what my mother was saying. It's like when you're a fish in water, you think fish talk about their water?
Yeah, exactly. There's a famous story that David Foster, I love that story.
Yeah,
Two fish are swimming together. How's the water? And the other fish look, what the heck is water? I never heard of water.
Yeah, right, exactly. How's the water? Is it warm? Is it cold?
Yeah.
How you feel? So I want to say this because actually what I find amusing
Yeah.
is that the next generation, myself and my cousins, as we talk and compare, they actually accuse my grandparents, my mother's parents, of being not emotionally expressive.
Interesting.
Exact
Because
opposite. In other words, they say,
It's
you never
bottled
expressed. Any suffering, you suffered in silence. Everything was internal. So I have to say, there is two sides to it. The one beautiful side, exactly as we're describing, you just live. And you don't have to make a drama for every
a
little
narrative.
thing.
Everything that happens has
Yeah.
to be like
A whole thing. And therefore there's a confidence that's instilled in you from your parents, which I definitely got from my parents. And my mother's describing how she got it from her parents. And my father for sure got it from his parents because he was just that way. My father was like the most the person most comfortable in his skin of anyone I know. Now, I want to know how many people are comfortable in their skin today.
No, that's what I'm
Now,
trying.
I grew up in a home in Stalin's communist Soviet Union,
Yeah.
who was like Hitler, Yamach Shemai,
Correct.
and with fear, and yet he was completely comfortable in his own skin.
Meaning where his own skin could have landed him in jail.
Exactly.
But he's
and
st-
the bottom line is, I think that the key was amuna for them. Amuna, faith in
Faith.
God, was not a word. It wasn't a workshop. It wasn't even Shar B'tachin from Chever Salavavas. Not to take away from that. It was what they lived. They breathed. Oxygen and amuna was the same thing for them.
So I want to understand because you said a very important point, which is about self-consciousness and sharing. I'm curious for you. Did you grow up in a home where your parents shared about their inner lives. Did you talk about your inner lives with your children? Do you think when he said that, when the cousins get together, the siblings get together, they talk about it's a generation that was not so self-expressive. Do you think there's truth to that, or you think, what are you talking about?
No, I know what the next generation, how they were taught. But I spoke to my children and we spoke about things. But again, we didn't have things that were like so bothering us and challenging. I don't know, it's just that maybe we were so naive and innocent.
Let me say it from my perspective. No, my parents and my grandparents as well, they didn't speak about their personal experiences. You could not get my father, you couldn't get my grandparents or my mother to talk about anything that really bothered them. So, on one hand, you could say the impression is that either they were not introspective and thinking about it, or on the contrary, they lived their lives and those things were not that significant to them. And so in that sense, it's a tremendous contrast. Today, everybody's talking about everything, and sometimes too much.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, but I will say this. So I think to myself, and I would ask my mother this question, let's talk about real trauma, not, imagined trauma.
Yeah.
Where somebody said something the wrong way to someone and they have to go to therapy about, But let's talk real trauma, child molestation.
Sure.
Did that happen in the last generation or 2 generations ago? And what happened if a child was God forbid, raped? I mean, I hope I'm allowed to say this on this program.
No.
Or there was some real, someone was murdered. How was it dealt with? Did people talk about it or not? And I'm not saying that they didn't deal with it. Maybe they dealt completely different way. But we could probably never engage that generation to talk about these things. If I asked that to my grandparents, and I knew my grandparents, my mother's parents, they just wouldn't talk. They wouldn't say no comment. It just would be a non-topic. So I wonder if something like that really happened. Was it that they were so healthy in so many other areas that this became insignificant? And what happens if it happened to your own child? Did you just say, let's move on and just believe in Hashem and everything's... And remember, I'm not necessarily talking about from anti-Semites or from outside. Let's say something in the community. Someone did something to someone inappropriate. And I'm sure that there were... I mean, we do have le'signov, le'sirtzach. We know that
we don't murder,
Yetzer Hara
wasn't
born in the 20th century. So I'd love to hear my mother respond to that.
Is that something? Meaning, this is what I'm essentially trying to get at. Is that
if something actually like that happened, would have been ever talked about? Would have been addressed? Would have been
I don't
ignored?
even know, because we didn't even know about children that were born, for example, Down syndrome.
Yeah.
I think people were not open. Obviously, they were embarrassed to admit that they had a Down syndrome, but because we never heard of that there's such a thing as a Down syndrome child.
But were there any handicapped children in your community, like friends or anybody?
Not that I'm thinking to it. We had a girl who was slow and stuff like that, so everybody treated her a little more nicely and stuff like that. But there wasn't anything that I don't remember anybody also coming from school and saying, I'm not going to school tomorrow.
Well, what about, do you remember a kid who had a parent who died or got put in jail or something, like it happened close to your community? Does that child go to school the next day? Like their parents got
No, the child did not go to school that day, and everybody was really very supportive of the family.
Would word spread in the community? Like it was like now, there's always, WhatsApp groups and so-and-so's getting divorced. So-and-so you heard this happen, you heard that
Or a little
happened.
child got, God forbid, cancer. Or
Yeah.
The communication was not like now, where in one instant everybody knows everything. You spoke to your neighbors, but you didn't speak to somebody out of town.
But
so
do you
easily.
remember an incident that it happened in the community and there was a collective gasp? Like, oh, boy, I can't believe it.
Because again,
I think
there wasn't that
the bar
kind
as
of
well.
communication, instant communication. For example, something happened to a neighbor. We had this next door neighbor who had this girl that was slightly challenged. So all of us on the block were very supportive. But I can't say that I spoke to somebody, or my friends I spoke to, but I wouldn't speak to somebody on the next block or in the next. Now it's a whole different story. You come to shul, everybody knows everything.
So this is what I want to try to understand and hear each of your perspectives on. And we could start with you. What do you attribute this generational change to in the way that we share and speak about our own emotional life? Are we more in touch emotionally? Do we just have more avenues for communication, so we got to share something? What do you look at when you look at the difference? Is it that we just don't have the faith of previous generations? I hope that's not the answer. I think people
I think it's a combination of several factors, not necessarily in order of priority, but I think one key difference is a change in the whole environment. Today we're free. We don't have oppressors. We're not hiding. And I think freedom, with all its blessings, also creates a lot of apathy, a lot of free time, and a lot of sense of entitlement. That didn't exist in that generation. There was no sense of entitlement. Every second was accounted for. Not that they were perfect, but it was like you felt the pressure. Anti-Semitism was around you, even if you didn't experience it. But today, the sense of entitlement, the amount of time people have, the leisure, there was no leisure. Today you could sit and watch television for 6 hours or go on your phone. That didn't exist. And I think that what we call, boy reik ein bei mayim, it's an empty pit. So what happens when there's a vacuum? Nachashim v'akravim yesh boi. All the scorpions and the
snakes come
the
in
demons.
And fill it up.
Today, and I deal with many people. I see this. People have so many demons in their minds, some real, some imagined, but they have the time to think about it. But when you're running for your life, and I'm just putting myself in the shoes of my grandparents, you have to bring up 8, 9 children. I mean, how many children did they have in Georgia? 5?
5.
5.
And, yeah.
And your life is make sure my children are going to be from Jews in a difficult world, give them strong emunah, and that's your main priority. Not billions of dollars. You're not going for any Pesach programs. You're not traveling to Israel because you're in a bad mood. And moods don't make a difference for that matter. The crystallized focus on those values really almost eliminates so many of the negative things. So our blessing has become our, I don't want to say curse.
No,
so
but
I think that's one
is.
Major difference. Major difference.
There's existential boredom.
There's a whole different reality. I would love to hear from my mother if she remembers the shift from that consciousness and when coming to America. Because the Rebbe actually talked about it. The Rebbe would say that there's a beautiful concept. The Baal Shem Tov, everyone knows the song Tzama L'cha Nafshi, the verse.
The Rebbe sings it so beautifully.
Yeah, Tzama L'cha Nafshi, my heart is thirsty, my soul is thirsty. Be'eretz sea of Oyef, I'm in a parched, arid land, bli moyim, without water. And then the end is a very interesting end to that verse. Kein ba'kodesh chazisicha. What does that mean? Kein ba'kodesh chazisicha literally
also
means,
in holiness.
also in holiness I shall see you. But what's the also? You're just talking about a very
being
negative
thirsty
situation.
And parched and
right.
You're looking.
So what's the also?
Okay.
So the Baal Shem Tov interprets Cain, read it halavai. Halavai. That even b'kodesh, when I don't have all these challenges, when I'm not thirsty and I'm sated and I'm living in
I have freedom and
I should have the same passion.
The same thirst,
and
even when I have
passion
access.
And Mesiras Nefesh, just as when I was dying from thirst. So in other words, in the Soviet Union and in very difficult circumstances, now nobody wants to return the clock back, obviously, but there was a certain pure sincerity because it was all about surviving as a Jew. And much of that could be lost easily when you came to the United States or to other free countries, because now you don't have to fight for anything. And when you don't have to fight, you ask an average American, boy or girl, Jew or not Jew, what do you stand for? What are you ready to die for? You asked that question to my mother as a child. Everyone knew what they died for Yiddishkeit, for God.
And they had to really be ready. It wasn't just
and for my family and for the next generation. Today, what am I ready to die for? Maybe that my football team should win the Super Bowl, or I should be able to go on a vacation, So I see this all the time. When COVID came around, for example, and suddenly people's comfort zones and security blankets were stripped, that suddenly, like Warren Buffett says, until the tide is out, you don't know who's been
You
swimming
don't know
naked.
who's wearing a bathing suit.
You don't know who's been
Exactly.
swimming naked. Suddenly
Yeah.
you're naked because you can't run to your local restaurant or your comfort zones. I think that is a major difference, which also tells us what's needed today. Because you need to find a way. You can't just say...
So I want to come back to today.
Yeah, we'll get back to... But that, I think, is one major difference. And as a result, yes, you need deeper resources to strengthen that amunah, because today it's called mitzvah sanoshim lamada. Culturally,
You're born into it.
Yeah, you're born
It's-
to Judaism.
it's like a moving sidewalk,
My
I
mother
compare
said
it
Moda
sometimes.
Ani in the morning. That was their biggest antidote and preventive medicine to the challenges of their time. Today you say Moda Ani. Yeah,
I'm grateful.
It's
Great,
it's
good.
cultural and so on.
Yeah.
Shabbos for them was a true oasis because it was like a day of real menucha, real calm.
Yeah.
Today Shabbos, okay, what shalom am I going to eat and which kiddush am I
Shalom
going?
Zacher.
So I want to jump into that
Yeah.
because you brought up a few things that just triggered my memory. As far as Shabbos, my father wrote, I found some pieces of writing of my father that he never shared. And he wrote that he lived in Poltava, that's at the Ukraine. And he said on Shabbos, you could feel Shabbos in the street.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so what I wanted to jump in is that what he was saying about freedom and Russia. So in Russia, no freedom. We're constantly, I'm a serious nefesh. You're constantly fighting for
Sacrificing
something.
constantly.
You are never just apathetic.
Never
It's a-
complacent, yeah.
Yeah, never apathetic. And then you come to America, and there's freedom. You don't have to fight for Shabbos candles. You don't have to fight for kashrus. You don't have to fight for covering your hair, to go to the mikveh. You don't have to go to a frozen well to go to the mikveh. You don't have to fight for anything.
Do you have a clear memory of the first time that you realized the distinct cultural difference of America? As a young child, you're coming off of a boat, you're coming into this new world. When did it become clear to you that this is going to be very different than my experience in Russia?
I have to say that we had a difficult life in America.
Materially.
Materially.
Yeah, materially.
Poverty.
So, it's funny. My mother knew English because she was in high school in Russia. She took up English instead of French. Her friends took French. She took English. She doesn't know why.
Yeah.
She knew English. My father had no language. My mother had now 6 children, and finally a number 7 came up. No money. So we lived not an easy life. I feel that my life was more difficult when we first came to America than it was in Russia.
Why do you
Because
say
my
that?
mother in Russia was a queen.
She was
She
a
was
queen.
the foundation of the home. She was the queen. And in America, she was an immigrant.
And your father was a successful businessman.
And my father was very successful.
Really?
He
Wow.
always had money, although in Russia you're not supposed to have money.
Yeah.
He always had money. I don't know how he did that. So they were like in a very good place.
Interesting. So when you came to
Materially.
America, you actually were
Exactly.
Immigrants.
You went down. It was an immigrant
Immigrants.
experience. So let me ask a different question.
I just want to finish one
please.
more point because
course.
it's very important. So, although go ahead. You do. Go ahead.
No,
go
but
ahead.
did you ever have a moment where you realized the spiritual shift, that this is now a new complacent country, or...
No, because I'll tell you what, because we're always doing what we need. We always daven and learn and eat. We lived a very Jewish life.
But what about with your own children? That's the question I wanted to know. Was there a point?
And it's also very interesting that since in Russia,
Yeah.
we were always rich in
Yeah.
that sense. We never felt deprived. I had that ingrained in me that I brought up my children. They never heard something like, we can't afford this. Never. And sometimes you couldn't afford things.
But
My husband-
you didn't feel deprived.
Absolutely never.
But at what point do you have a clear memory of your kid coming home and wanting something or being into some hobby, and you're like, "What is this American Narishkeit?"
Except
Guns?
for the gun.
Tell me. It clearly hit a memory, and you
Except
both
for the
have
guns. I don't
I
think
was
there
a kid in school, and me and one of my friends, we found one of these catalogs.
That was a comedy.
One of these catalogs.
Okay.
that sold stuff, and one of them was blank guns. For with blanks.
Gotcha, with blanks. Okay.
But it was an actual gun, but it was blocked up.
Yeah.
They used it for races and stuff.
Yeah,
like
that you shoot to start.
And
the race.
as kids, you see Superman, you see all these cartoons, and we thought it's cool. Let's get some guns.
There's nothing cooler than wait. So
yeah,
what
but
happened?
no, it's not illegal. Remember, these were not. You couldn't. They
correct. They didn't shoot. But what
Wait
happened
till you
next?
hear the drama.
Yeah.
What? Okay.
So we went into business. We opened the bank account. We got a few bucks, not a lot of money, a few dollars, and we bought like 5 guns. Like
How old are you?
We were living here already. I probably was 12 or 13.
Okay.
Okay.
So you bought 5 of these
I think,
blank starter
Yeah,
guns.
Yeah. He ran the finances. I ran the marketing. And
Okay.
it was a joke. It was kids.
Yeah.
But it was cool. We got the first gun. I remember it was heavy.
You feel
felt
like
it.
the
I
weight
never
of it.
saw. We only saw pictures.
Sure.
Anyway, and then we thought we'd resell it to like other bochum in yeshiva. Nobody was interested.
It's a classic business. When I was in high school, it was reselling knives. There was knife sales.
Anyway, so my mother was the ultimate spy.
Yeah.
Like she knew everything. We didn't know that she knew everything. Like she was suspicious even when there was nothing to be suspicious of. So, and I guess she saw something going on.
Yeah.
That I was dealing something illicit.
Yeah.
And I guess she discovered that I had a gun in my basket in the house. So
You're keeping them in the house.
yeah, my father was always more like, everything washed over him. He said, he would say, no big thing. But my mother made it into a federal case. My father stayed home. They kept me home from school. One morning, we're sitting at the table.
I insisted on
can
having
you
a
imagine?
meeting.
You had a meeting.
A meeting, and they both sat me down, and they like confronted me. Guns. I remember I was scared because they were like so serious.
Yeah.
And I said, it's not real guns. It's like, I don't remember what I said, but they were both like, did not accept it. And I don't know. I don't
not
remember.
not Tati, only I.
Yeah. My mother.
Why did it bother you so much?
A gun?
She thought the next thing I'll be a murderer.
You know you're going to go out and join the mafia or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I didn't think
For
of
the same
mafia.
reason, which yeshiva
Which kid
boy
has a
has
gun?
guns. And she didn't know the difference between a blank gun and not. It's a gun. It's a gun.
She probably.
Anyway, I honestly, I wasn't even like the word trauma. I wasn't traumatized by it.
Yeah.
It went. It came and went. And you see, we get along.
No, I saw right away when you had that story. That's absolutely.
I don't even remember. I probably, I don't know what. I probably got rid of them. I don't remember.
Aside from actual.
Let's put it this way. Once my mother got out of her system, I think things calmed down.
But I'm curious.
Right?
Aside from arms dealing,
Yes.
were there other very specific like trigger rules in your house growing up?
You want to talk about the heroin smuggling now? I'm just kidding. That's a joke.
Were there specific rules that you knew that like the kids knew, mommy and Tati or daddy, you can't mess around with this. Or
Well,
Forget about Daddy.
Forget
because
about daddy. He had no rules.
he had okay.
No rules. My father's attitude was, he didn't even have to articulate it. And I'll speak for him because I'm very similar to him. His attitude was, you plant the right seeds and you give the right, you water the garden. Everything's going to be fine. Don't make a fuss about little details. Like school, he didn't care what my marks were back and forth.
Mamish.
So as a child, you could have said he wasn't even around. My father was I only saw him Shabbos, really. He was very busy. He was a real workaholic. Loved his work, journalism, and his whole passion was in it. He was very passionate about it. And Shabbos I used to always love, of course, seeing my father. But it was basically almost hands-off. As I got older, I began to appreciate that my father gave me certain foundational things and didn't have that. Like my mother was, on the other hand, hands-on. That was the person I saw
And what was she very strict about?
And my mother, it wasn't so much specific rules. I can't say she said do this. Like there was no, like rules
like
as in
curfew or this or that.
yeah, like what we always. I'm trying to think. We were more afraid of my mother than my father because she was like watching, and so on. But
And she's the one who would yell at you.
I honestly did not. I did not grow up with feeling like intimidated by my mother, as in if you don't do this, you're going to be punished. I didn't really feel that way. I didn't feel any punitive element growing up. Like I know others in religious something. Like even if I did something, I remember I don't know if I'll say it anyway. I remember we had a neighbor on Sullivan Place. They were Jewish, but they were not observant, and they decided to take me and my sister on Shabbos to the department store. There was a store. Remember where was it? On Montgomery.
Not knowing where it wasn't like
Bedford Avenue. There was a store with toys, stuff like that.
they're trying to be nice.
Yeah, they just took us along with their kids.
Yeah.
And I don't think my mother didn't know. We ended up going.
Just pause. They brought you on Shabbos on a car.
Not in a car. No,
not
we
in a
walked.
car.
We
You
walked.
walked.
It was just
Walking
a
distance,
No,
yeah.
it wasn't a car. We
And you
walked.
But
And-
I just
So
want to pause.
this I remember. Yeah.
I want to pause because listeners, they don't always appreciate. You might not even appreciate it. You had friends who were not observant,
Yeah. They were living
Growing
on my
up.
block, and
you were okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and also we in the bungalow colony we had sometimes other people in the bungalow colony were not necessarily Shomer Shabbos.
For example, on Shabbos, I just want to say some of the kids were on bicycles on Shabbos, and my kids said, "How come they?" I said, "They were never told that you're not allowed, so that's why they're doing it."
Yeah, and
I never criticized and said, "Wow, look at those kids! They're driving."
Also, remember, growing up in a Chabad home, generally you're much more tolerant.
Gotcha.
You don't vilify.
You're not vilifying
the
yeah.
non-Shabbos. And I was in Crown Heights in those years. There were also a lot of secular Jews here. In the,
Yeah,
in the
it was
60s.
a mixed community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
So anyway,
continue,
so they took us to the store. Could it be A&S, Abraham and Strauss? I don't remember what it was. No,
A&S is downtown Brooklyn. No.
Anyway, so we went to the store, and then they offered to buy us something, like a little toy or a little whatever. And I remember my sister said, "It's Shabbos today. We can't." I, in my own little, I guess, halachic mode, and cutting corners, said, my sister said we can't carry.
Yeah.
That was the main thing.
Uh-huh.
And I said if we put it in our pockets, we could carry. I'm just telling you what happened. I mean, chatose ani masker,
No, wow.
Think of it, confession.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. My mother didn't know, but she did know because I came home with something in my pocket. And my mother was not happy. And that was I remember that was, so my point was it really didn't happen all the time. Another time, Shavuos, we had a park right across the street on Sullivan Place.
Yeah.
So I ended up playing baseball on Shavuos, catching. And my mother caught me.
She told you.
And she said, Shavuos, how could you be playing Shavuos? So it's the fact that I remember these few incidents tells me it didn't happen every day. And even then, I never felt, as I said, obviously, a kid doesn't like to be reprimanded. But I never came away with that experience that I find today many people growing up in very frum homes and were very traumatized. We call religious trauma, and have rejected Yiddishkeit because they were punished for it.
Because that's what.
I didn't have any.
Correct,
of that.
and that's what fascinates me so much is that since that time in the 1950s, and that experience is probably not that unique, that you had non-observant friends who you knew your kids were playing with, you knew that they were
Absolutely,
not, weren't observant in the level that you needed. The instinct nowadays in the Orthodox community is got to keep your kids away from non-Orthodox kids. That's the number one. I would call it a rule, but that's the number one instinct that every parent, if my kids are going to get exposed, if they're going to see kids who are not keeping Shabbos the way that we keep it, who are not following kosher the way that we keep it, you have to keep them away. And that's why in so many schools, they're so careful what kind of home you're from, what kind of the parents like. Why was that not a major concern for your generation?
Okay, first of all, because we're Chabad, okay? So we were, then coming from Russia, we were surrounded mostly by non-religious people, or goyim. So there was no such a thing as saying, oh, you can't hang out with your neighbor because they're not religious. First of all, what we did is this is how we live. We didn't judge anybody who didn't live that way. We didn't blame them because they didn't have such parents as we did. So it's not that we said, oh, you can't play with this, or you can't. Everybody was fine. And we knew one thing, and that was instinctive. I don't think anybody said it so openly, that our job is really to be who we are, and that's it. That's what our job is. Who we are. We're not afraid of being affected.
But I have to say, David, just for the record, I think you're talking here to a family that's probably unique a bit.
Tell me.
I don't think every Chabad family you hear the same thing. I mean, there's a reason that myself, my brothers, my sisters, my parents, in a sense, we didn't really assume a dogmatic and fear-based Jewish education. But I don't think that's the rule. I think many people you speak to, even very fine people, fear played a big role in their upbringing, and therefore, avoiding, let's say, secular or non-religious
Meaning, among your Chabad
influences.
friends, would you have described your home growing up as more open than your other Chabad friends?
Absolutely.
In what way?
But not when I was a child, because I didn't know better then.
But
now,
looking back.
in contrast, my parents really, for example, never censored things I read.
It's so funny you mentioned that. My mother,
I was a voracious reader.
me too.
And my parents
What
were
were
both
you reading as a kid? You remember?
books that really, secular books?
Yeah.
You're talking about Torah books.
Secular books that had.
Secular books, as a kid,
Yeah.
Count of Monte Cristo, I sat one a whole Shabbos just reading it, and
reading
I never
on
went
Shabbos.
to
We're
shul.
all about reading on Shabbos.
Yeah, I never went to shul that day because it was so exciting. It was a page turner.
Yeah.
That
mamish.
was so all those classics. A little older, a book like Vanity Fair by Thackeray. A book
You were reading like real classics as a kid.
serious
Yeah,
books.
that's what I think I told you.
Yeah, you had
Yeah.
in the house.
Our
Oh, yeah.
house was open as far as
So
literature.
my
and-
parents are both well read and very literate.
And they never censored them.
No,
Because
my
I
mother.
need to tell you, my mother.
I'm sure if I brought home a book or found a book that was like really too rated, my mother would probably.
That's
she
what
wouldn't
happened to
censor
us.
it. She would disappear. That's what would
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Suddenly
I
it
would
used
to read-
disappear.
I read John Grisham and I loved it. My mother started to realize that all the movies based on the books are all rated R, so this is not going to be appropriate. So then I asked my mother, I want to read Mario Puzo's The Godfather. And my mother said that was the first time. She said, I have to read ahead to make sure. She handed me the book. I opened it up. It looks like it was censored by the FBI. Blacked out, like full
It's called,
lines.
what do they call it?
Yeah.
Redacted.
Yeah, it was redacted.
I
It
didn't
looked like
do
the
that. I
Mueller.
didn't
It looked like the Mueller
No,
report.
that never would happen.
So you had more literature in the home. And it was
literature in
more
my
open.
home, and also the tone in my home, the environment, was one where if I asked a skeptical question, I wouldn't be punished for it. We had a certain skepticism. My father was very open-minded. Like if I asked my father, how do you know there's a God? Some of my friends would get a slap, and they'd be punished for it. For me, it was very loose and open-minded. My mother, I don't know how maybe later it would have been different as she got older, but when my childhood, these things were like, I never felt like, straitjacketed. It actually may have destroyed my life, to be honest, because by nature I am skeptical and I ask questions, and if I kept being silenced, at some point it would have exploded. Because not when you're 5, but older, you can't stop someone who likes to read and tell them don't read. Mm-hmm. We'd be like blindfolding a person. I can't look at things because you may look at the wrong thing. So I felt I could breathe. I basically breathed in my home, and that comfort was also, again, I go back to the self-consciousness. My parents, I never felt that they were self-conscious about their Judaism. So it was never. So even if you did something wrong, yes, you may be corrected, or you may even be grounded or something, but never in any extreme way. So I always felt no one ever. Let's put it this way: I was never invalidated as a human being, even if I did something wrong. It was always validated, and that to me. So I maintain my self-esteem and confidence in a very powerful way.
Let me ask
That would be maybe different, but that's already family to family,
But
religious or not religious.
1,000%, and this is a sensitive question, but I want to ask you, do you see any differences in the style of parenting, in the style of home, of the one that you created and the ones that you see your children creating? What do you think are the primary differences, if any? Maybe it's exactly the same. You step into your children's home, it's like, this is like the way I raise my kids. What do you notice, if anything at all, are the main differences between the way you raised your children and the way your children are raising their children?
Even though I don't think I was a closed-up person, but when I come into my children's homes, I just feel that they're more open, they're more, expansive, although our home was always expansive. We never...
Could you be more specific? Like, what do you see? It's
I
like,
see
we never did that.
a closer relationship. I mean, I was very good with my children, but I can't say I had a relationship with them. I didn't have a relationship with my children.
What do you mean by that?
I won't be able to call that, because now relationship means you talk, I spoke to my children a lot, but not like really personal things about I don't know.
I think back to what we spoke earlier about emotionally experiencing your own.
You weren't doing that. How you like? What's going on in your life? And like,
how you
exactly. Feeling? Are you nervous?
Or I went through something similar when I was a teenager. Things like that.
Yeah, you didn't have that growing up.
No, we didn't have that, because it was, again, their emotions were more. They just were who they were.
If I were to ask you that same question, how do you feel you and your siblings are raising your children differently than the way you were raised? Would you point to the same contrast?
Well, there's some things that all of us, meaning me and my 4 siblings, have that are very similar to my parents. I see that because we inherited those. But there are some differences because we all also remember married. So our spouses also
For sure.
have a big factor involved. And it's different. I think not all our siblings are the same. I can make distinctions of how experiences.
Were there specific things that you did differently? You say, you know what, I grew up with X, I want to do Y.
I'm more like my father, very hands-off. Also, I defer a lot to my wife in the education of my kids. Like, if she had asked me, which school to go to, whatever you think is right. I was none, some men get involved. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any of that. Anything in the home was my wife's domain. Also out of laziness, to be very frank, not because I was just so... Because, she was good at this, and she was excellent, actually. And I was more like... I always felt the foundational things I have to make sure I'm there, providing emotional support, especially in time, just that invisible foundation that I got from it wasn't so deliberate. It's just who I am. It wasn't like, and obviously at times you have to get more involved and so on. So I was I think very similar to my father, very similar, and almost like I think even more laid back in a certain way because I think I was more skeptical than him even. But I also was not a big fan of the establishment, of Jewish establishment.
Even always.
Yeah, because school and so on. So I saw the chinuch, the yeshiva system, more like a holding pattern.
Yeah.
Like a sophisticated babysitting service.
Yeah.
It's like, keeping the plane before it lands, let's make sure it stays out of trouble. So I really always felt that with you infusing it to your children, the confidence is more foundational things. It wasn't like I didn't really care if they got an A+ or they didn't. It wasn't how I measured it. And so it was very much also that vote of confidence. So my kids are very much I see as them, they're now adults, they have their own children.
For sure.
So they're very much how obviously they're different than I am, but they have a certain element very similar. So I see it was the same results that happened with me, happened with my kids. But I wouldn't say necessarily with all my siblings it's that way. But I'm somewhat subjective, not with all my siblings. Because my siblings have different styles and their spouses in different circumstances. But in my case, I for sure can say things turned out very similar to the way I grew up.
So let me ask one.
Would you agree? With myself, at least.
Yeah,
you're right. You're right. Because
the siblings, it depends who they married and so
for
on.
Sure.
So it's a little different. Yeah.
One question.
Also, my wife is very much similar background.
Like we
Russian
are, yeah.
Russian parents, and a lot of the value systems with Chabad and the Rebbe. There's just certain givens.
So that's exactly what I want to get to. I want to talk a little bit about...
And all my siblings, just for the record, married beautiful people. They're all great. It's just different approaches and different challenges sometimes, life circumstances.
I want to talk about the parenting of a Chabad home. And I'm so curious about the specific directives, like what a Chabad home, the signature parenting style of where the Rebbe or the Friedricher Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, where they were very vocal about the style of parenting for a Chabad home. Do you think that there is a specific whether it's concerns or rules or boundaries or style or flavor that characterize the parenting style of a Chabad home?
Great question.
Great question. First of all, I want to go back a drop into the idea that in Russia we lived with Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, you knew that you're fighting for who you
Mesiras
are.
Nefesh meaning sacrifice with real...
Yeah. You're living and fighting to be who you need to be. When you come to America...
No taking for granted, basically.
Yeah. Nothing is taken for granted. You were brought up a certain way, and you're going to fight to stay that way. When you came to America, all of a sudden, you have to fight for anything.
Yeah.
Everything is easy. I wouldn't say the first years when I came to America. Again, I was, we didn't have an easy life, so I'm going to leave that alone because it was challenging.
But the Judaism, you didn't have to
but the
fight for.
Judaism. So what happened here? I watched people that we lived with in Russia, because I left. I wasn't so young. I was 10 years old, so I had experienced. It's not like I was 5 years old or anything. 10-year-old, and I watched people totally change when they came to America. Nothing to fight for. You know what? I want to have an easy life. Let me see if I can get a little business. Let's see if I can get some, own something. You need to buy a house. It was more totally materialistic. All of a sudden, Chabad people were totally like, I don't have to fight to be frum. I'm Chabad, I'm fine, I'm frum. But my lifestyle is really like, I don't have to fight for anything. And this was the challenge. I watched my mother and father didn't change one bit in that sense. My father was not looking for business to make money so he could be like he was in Russia. He had money. Here he had no money.
But did the Rebbe give specific parenting advice for raising kids in America?
I'm coming to that.
Please.
The Rebbe when he became Rebbe, what he saw this, that nobody's fighting for anything. So he was challenged his people that now it's a different kind. Mesiras Nefesh is called what in English?
Self-sacrifice?
Self-sacrifice.
Total commitment.
Total commitment. There, your life was in danger. Here, your soul is in danger. So he says, you're still a Mesiras Nefesh. You still have to fight, but you're fighting a different battle. You're fighting an inner battle now. You don't have to fight an outer battle. So the Rebbe was so strong about sticking to your principles. And what are your priorities? Especially speak to the women. There are the few people with the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe himself who spoke directly to women. You know who you are? And he said, your pride is not at that time it was a Hollywood kitchen and wall-to-wall carpeting. So some people says, so you're not allowed to have wall-to-wall carpeting, right? The Rebbe didn't say that. He said that should not be your priority. Furniture from Italy. The Rebbe spoke very openly about these materialistic things that we're now, it's easy to get because we don't have to fight for our Yiddishkeit. Now you're fighting for your neshama. What kind of life are you going to live? Your job is not only to stick to your principle, to affect the whole world with that, to affect your neighbors, to affect everybody.
So I'll translate that into, can I weigh in?
No,
Yeah,
please.
So I'll translate that into what you asked about. So what does that mean, family values?
Yeah.
It means the key thing is to inculcate into your children a passion for Yiddishkeit. Because today, you have to fight for that passion. In the old world, we didn't have to fight for that passion, because that's what your whole life was, to fight for your Yiddishkeit.
And
now, materialism is becoming so important. So the key is that mothers, who are the keres habayis, the foundation of the home, and fathers as well, don't take Yiddishkeit for granted.
But there was something specific that the Rebbe would emphasize.
I'm getting to that. So the number one thing was a deliberate commitment to spiritualize your home and passionate Judaism. Passionate.
That's what I was saying, that he spoke to the women.
And proactive Judaism, which meant the best defense is offense. We're not here just to protect ourselves, to be frum in a secular world. You need to do everything possible to influence others. The Rebbe's wisdom, he understood that the best way to create passionate, proactive Jews is if they inspire others. Because if you don't influence others, they're going to influence you. And you could put up all the ghetto walls and all the barriers and all the, like he could put on a horse blinders and all that.
Yeah.
And he realized, and today we know with technology, there are no such
They'll
walls.
scale the walls.
So that's really what defined Chabad. Not just the concept of shlichus, go out there, but teach the children. From the youngest of age, we were already told, go out and meet Jews. At 10 years old, put on tefillin or something. What, you're 10-year-old. You're just a kid. But he was teaching people to be leaders. And he realized that was the antidote to the apathy that freedom was.
As parents, which is so interesting. Because parents aren't really emphasizing that when you raise kids.
No.
It's
absolutely.
the opposite, because parents look at...
They're protecting their children.
It's even the opposite of... Unfortunately, I think it might even be deeper than that. You said you were always anti-institutional. And, it was like a holding pattern. Just don't mess it up. You know what I'm saying? And I'll take it from here. It's reversed now, where the parents look at themselves as the holding pattern, and the real work is being done in the institutions and the schools.
Okay, good point. So the point is, for example, I'll take myself as an example. When I was a teenager, I was looking for I was like a rebel without a cause. I had a lot of energy. I wanted a revolution. And then, thank God, the Rebbe is a revolutionary. But it took me time to learn that, because traditional Judaism seems to be very almost... you can say archaic and
it's very
like
conservative.
Reactionary.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like let's live like they lived 4,000 years ago.
We derive our authenticity so often by let's live let's look to the past.
And then I learned the opposite is true. That Judaism is so vibrant that we can take its spirituality and change the world going forward. So this was what the Rebbe was teaching, telling parents and educators for that matter. It's not enough just to have a yeshiva where they're excelling in learning Gemara and Shulchan Aruch and Chumash and Talmud and Primis HaTorah and Chassidus. We're teaching them to be soldiers, to go out and fight the war of ignorance and assimilation. And he actually quoted his own father-in-law and the fifth Chabad Rebbe, who established the first yeshiva, the Rebbe Rashab, Kol hayotze lemelchemes beis David. That's a common expression. Those that go out, the war of the house of David. In other words, there is a war going on. So imagine, look, how many people join the military, IDF or others, because they want a cause, they want to fight.
Yes.
So the Rebbe was he saw that the children are tzivus Hashem. What did he establish?
Right when you said that, it hit me.
In 1980, the Rebbe established this as tzivus Hashem. They are
the Rebbe, like the army of God.
Exactly. You're
fighting for something.
Here, you're not a bystander. You're not an observer. You're not an observant Jew observing others. You are a player in the game. You're proactive. You're a soldier. And soldier indicates total commitment. Like the Rebbe would often quote, a soldier is 24/7. Even when you're asleep, you're a soldier. And it also is proactive. You're not waiting. You have to do something. And there is an enemy. The enemy now is not the communists and Nazis. Now the enemy is apathy, ignorance, this complacency we're talking about. This was the essence of it. And basically, so all the Rebbe's campaigns, here's a campaign, that every home, including children's rooms, should become a migdash ma'at, a mini sanctuary. Shachanti b'socham. And how do you do that? Every child should have a siddur, a chumash, and a pushka in his room. So he has Torah, Avodah, Gemilas, Chasadim.
And the Rebbe said that all the children's rooms.
All children's rooms.
A siddur, a chumash, and a pushka.
Yeah. Just as an example. In other words, turn children into ambassadors of God. You don't have to wait. They're not just adults in the making one day, as they are right now. And the Rebbe gave time. He spent hours speaking to the children. And of course, speaking to the mothers, as my mother said. And just that was the whole, there was no farbrengen, no talk the Rebbe delivered that didn't have some pointers that were related to education and key and tips, basically, how to bring up a healthy, proactive, passionate Jew.
There is a struggle that a lot of parents have, which is raising kids who have let's say, learning disabilities, it's difficult, it's hard. There's another struggle that is spoken probably even less often, and that is, how do you raise very bright, precocious children? You have children who clearly have built incredible public personas for themselves and were asked as teenagers, 2 of your boys, right?
3 of my boys.
3 of your boys. Okay, I'm
and
sorry.
2 of my daughters. They're all very active in education. And
But you had a boy, Simon, you were the first who was asked by the Rebbe to be one of the reviewers to do that. How old were you when he asked you to do that?
Let me just correct. It's nice to say I was asked, but I wasn't asked.
Oh, yeah. You begged.
No one asked me. Can you imagine? They just
yeah, that's exactly.
No. I'm saying it for a reason,
Yeah.
not because just to correct the record. Because the Rebbe's approach was generally you have to draft yourself. He didn't. So I, as a teenager, was very intrigued by the process, and I got involved. And once I got involved, yes, I clearly had the Rebbe's endorsement
What
and
do
blessings.
you mean the process? Can you just open
Okay,
my
yeah.
eyes
So
to that?
so as I became more, as I started discovering what I like to call the music of Judaism, the soul of Judaism through Hasidus, and that's what really aroused my passion.
As a teenager.
Yeah, not just I was not looking to be a mechanical Jew.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever would have been. I was looking for a passionate Judaism, a soulful Judaism. So when I started getting inspired, one of the things, of course, I looked to the Rebbe because he's like the leader. So I want access to the top, a mind like that, a soul like that. And as I became to identify more, as a child, the Rebbe was the king on the hill. I always respected him, but I had no connection on a personal
But you
level.
got to see him in ways that the current...
Yeah, no, absolutely. I saw him all the time. But you know what? You could take these things for granted too. I didn't appreciate him. That seeing him doesn't mean you appreciate it. The Jews saw the Beis Hamikdash and things happened. But as I got to appreciate more, and I saw that he's a true revolutionary, that he wants to pioneer a spiritual revolution in these difficult times spiritually. And the more success we had materially and technologically, the more the spirituality was being compromised. I felt I want to be part of this army. So I enlisted myself.
How do you enlist yourself? What do? You just get up one day and start reviewing what the Rebbe said?
No. In my case, I began learning a lot, began reading a lot about this. And, I tried to access the best, the teachers that I felt I respected, that really knew their things. It's like you hang around, like if you want to become a lawyer, you hang around with good lawyers.
Yeah.
I hang around with the best. I hang around with good minds. And then I was very intrigued by the process that the Rebbe would speak on Shabbos and Yom Tov. No notes and no recordings. So it all had to be memorized.
Yeah.
I just was completely mesmerized by that prospect. So I started doing it. I started hanging around. Every after Shabbos, they would get together, a small group, to review. So I used to hang around there. And I would weigh in. I'd give my few thoughts. And I became good at it. And I excelled. And everyone recognized that. So as you excel, you climb the ranks. So everyone came that way. Nobody was handpicked.
Like drafted or
Nobody was
handpicked.
handpicked.
So I'm curious.
It's like a good student rises.
So
as I did
Yeah.
that, so as I did that, of course, the Rebbe then was involved because I also became the main writer of the Farbrengen. But it was a consensus. Everyone saw that I was good at it. So the Rebbe's endorsement was by editing what I wrote. He actually edited.
He spent his time on your
editing
words.
and answering my questions, and I got more and more involved. And I literally communicated with the Rebbe maybe 10 times a day at times.
Really?
Not in speaking, in writing. Everything was professional in writing. So I have thousands of pages.
It wasn't on the phone. It was...
No. It was in writing. Remember, writing, it was all edited works.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very professional. So I have thousands of pages of the Rebbe's handwritten answers to me personally, to questions and queries, as well as edits on the Rebbe's talks.
I'm always fascinated by how the Rebbe edited. You see,
like a surgeon with a scalpel,
Yeah.
the precision. And that changed everything for me because first I had this direct access, and I was literally speaking to the top. This is can't get higher than that. So this for me, if you're talking about education wise, this to me turned me into a very proactive and very driven and everything I am today was a result of that being shaped.
So I'm curious, as a parent, this may seem very strange. This is a quintessentially non-Chabad question. As a parent, when you see your child rising the ranks in the Rebbe, is there any part of you that gets possessive, that gets like, am I losing my kid? Like nowadays, if you had a kid, again, I preface this with a quintessentially non-Chabad
Excellent question. I don't
But-
apologize.
It's a very
but,
good-
but nowadays, if my child came home and he said, my Rebbe's unbelievable, he's a revolutionary, he knows everything, and let's say he really did know everything, and I'm corresponding with him 10 times a day in writing, and he's everything, and he gave me my sense of self and my self-esteem, and hear my kid talk about this, I'd be sitting there as a parent, and I'd be like,
Where am I?
yeah, what's going on here? So I'm curious, what is the role, a Chabad parent, especially when you have a superstar child, how do you react? What did you feel? How do you make sure that he doesn't float off? I'm sure there were people who are very precocious, very bright, they go in too deep. Like you need to sometimes pull people out of the Holy of Holies, to spend all your day, especially as a teenager, hanging out with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the... So what are you thinking as a parent?
So I want to tell you what was happening.
Yeah.
When he would finish with over there, he would come home, and we would be talking only about what he did and what the Rebbe said and what the Rebbe corrected and what the Rebbe gave a different kind of explanations for what he was doing. We were so involved and we were so excited that we were actually getting it from somebody who got it from the Rebbe. To our home was a hub, I don't know if I would say, for people to come and discuss the Rebbe's Verbrengens. So we were so involved that it was just like being in heaven.
But let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you think, especially your husband, he's making a name, he's running the Allgemeiner, was there ever competitiveness you felt, let me just ask the question, between your husband and his children in their name and persona? And secondly, and this is an even more sensitive question that I would love to hear you, did you ever see and notice competitiveness among your children? You have a lot of children who are all in the public light. They're all earning a living because they're writing books and speaking and people love their words. How do you make sure that your kids don't end up chewing each other's heads off?
I didn't have to make sure because they were, again, involved in exactly the same thing. My husband...
You don't think there was ever jealousy
Yeah.
between your kids in terms of who's the best, who remembers the best? You didn't see that?
I didn't see that. Did you see that?
Well, we'll get to...
Okay, let me finish.
Yeah.
First of all, with my
I want
husband.
to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
One second. My husband had also his own world, and he was big in his world. He
Huge,
was-
the Allgemeiner.
That's what I'm saying. He was a great journalist.
Yeah.
So he had his own...
This whole
sphere.
setup is my
Yes.
way of trying to get into the Allgemeiner 100 influential
He
Jews
had his
category.
own sphere of
picks
influence.
those?
You understand? Sphere of influence.
Yeah.
So this was just another prize that was coming into his.
He had a sense of pride from his kids.
Exactly. There was no competitor because he had his own
Yeah.
outlet, and this was just another totally different.
So,
But because my husband also wrote about what the Rebbe
and had his
spoke.
own relationship with the Rebbe.
Yeah. And he wrote about what the Rebbe... First of all, my husband had this uncanny...
Sense.
what is it?
Sense.
That when he heard the Rebbe speaking, he heard news. By him, it was the latest news was happening by the Rebbe, because the Rebbe would hint at things.
He's always reacting to the world.
And he would catch what the Rebbe wants. And he would immediately, the next day, it was written up in the newspaper. So he was so involved with that himself, but in a different way, that there would be no competitiveness at all.
So I want
And I think also my other children, they were proud of each other. They were very proud that he was the main scribe for the Rebbe. Are you kidding?
No, the reason why I come from a family too. We're all precocious in different ways, but especially in families, sibling rivalries, competitiveness. Even with a parent, I grew up in the shadow of my father. My father was larger than life. He was an oncologist to all the Rebbes and all the important people and all the everything. And anytime I would introduce myself, Bashevkin, they'd hear my last name, and they would say, "Oh, your father's a malach. That's what it was. He's an angel. He's everything." And now it's role reversals. My father's retired. I'm still in the public square, and he hears from me. But I remember as a kid, I guess when you look at a parent, it could feel overwhelming. It could feel like too much. So I'm curious for you, from the eyes of you growing up, your relationship to your father and the other siblings.
Absolutely. So this may be a little different than my mother's perspective, which is
Okay.
fine. My mother sees only the
Sure.
beauty in all her children. So firstly, let's talk about my father first. And I think it's a good way to contextualize it. And this, I think my mother would agree. I don't put words in your mouth, but you have to remember, for a Chabad parent, a healthy parent, and I'll just quote a story. I remember when we were students in yeshiva, and some of my friends, my classmates, were going off to other yeshivas. Because Chabad, they exchanged.
Sure.
Like, there was a yeshiva in Miami, in Los Angeles, in Seattle, Cincinnati. And the Rebbe met the parents and their children who were going off. And the Rebbe gave everybody, I think, $1 or maybe a kuntras or something, a booklet. And the Rebbe said to the parents, "Thank you for bringing your children till here, and I take that upon my shoulders from here on." And all those parents came out beaming. They didn't see the Rebbe as a competition to them. They felt they were a success story. Here, they like basically they trained the soldiers, and the Rebbe is ready to take them into his army. So, though my mother didn't put it that way, I think so. There was never that question you asked initially. Didn't you feel that your son is being like
Taken away.
away? Again, I'm sure you concur with
No,
what I'm saying.
yours explaining it very well.
Yeah, so it was actually seen as a success story because no one saw the Rebbe as a competition to me. If the Rebbe is ready to say that my children can be part of his
the
bigger
ultimate
vision,
arrival.
that's like bringing people to Moshe Rabbeinu and to Hashem. And I did,
Being drafted onto
I did
the-
a good job. So people saw that as with tremendous pride.
Yeah.
It was like the biggest thing is, even though, of course, there's a tinge, let's say a shliach goes out to Australia. So, of course, mother and father want him to be close to them. But so you get over that discomfort for the bigger cause. My child is going out and creating a Kiddush Hashem, changing the world. So that's one thing. My father, interestingly, a few times he wanted me to come into the Allgemeiner. But I was completely consumed with what I was doing, and I loved it. So he never made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Let's put it this
Gotcha.
way. But he offered me a few $1 million, one thing. I wasn't exactly getting paid. But a few times he spoke, but it was never, why are you working for the Rebbe? Come work for me. That was never the thing, because he knew what I was doing and what he was doing was the same thing. He just did it
Exactly.
through the media, and I did it more through Torah.
Through Torah,
Through Chassidus,
But you're both spreading the vision
and my
of
father was
Chabad.
more of a journalist. I was more of a thinker and a writer
Sure.
about ideas. My father didn't write about theology, even though he was a brilliant man. But it was more me. That's why after my father passed away, actually, I felt that the Allgemeine should continue because I saw the Allgemeine as is just a different type of voice. It's a voice for Israel, for the Jewish people through a different lens. And it's not that the Allgemeine is not a Torah journal. It's a very different approach. So that's as far as that goes. And in addition, by the way, just for the record, my father was a brilliant man, tremendous skills, but I wouldn't have worked for him even if I was not working in the talks. If I may say this with respect to my father and
No,
my
it was
mother.
very hard to work for
Yeah,
him.
my father once asked me to come work for the Allgemeine. The Allgemeine he was getting older. The Allgemeine had its challenges. And I said, what do you want me to do? I wanted a job description. I knew that's going to just end it right there because he couldn't give me a job description. He says, everything. You're my son.
yeah.
You do everything. So I said, you do everything. Why do you need two people to do everything? So he says, what do you mean? Like you're my son.
Yeah.
So I said, tell me what I do and what I don't do. What are my responsibilities? Anyway, that ended it because my father was not capable.
He's not drafting
of
up a
because my
job.
father was this completely dedicated. We do everything, which we all know can only create problems.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working with others. You
Yes.
can't have everyone do it. Anyway, that was that. Going to the siblings. So I was the oldest.
Yeah.
So I was the oldest. My youngest brother, Fitzrock,
It's also, yeah.
famous Rabbi YY. He's 15 and a half years younger than me.
Wow.
You have to keep that in mind. So, if we were like 2 years apart or 4 years apart, it may have been a lot different, because in many ways, and I'm not taking credit, I think he's great and he does his work, but I used to bring him to Farbrengens as a little child. He stood near me.
Yeah.
And I used to say to him when he was 10 years old, Svitza, remember the last few lines of every talk, because the Rebbe's brachas were. So, in a way, I trained him, not just trained him. He probably would say he doesn't even know maybe what he does today is because of me.
Yeah.
He does say that you.
Yeah, but
helped
I
him.
don't. But I don't take credit for him, because he's a mahus of his own. So so I don't. So I do think there is some rivalry, some jealousy. I don't know if is the right word. The expression "b'chol ha'adam miskana chutz mibnoi v'talmidei."
Yeah.
You're envious of everyone except your child and your student.
Doesn't include siblings there.
Yeah, but achicha gadol is considered like
Okay.
So maybe
okay.
and
The oldest sibling is like a parent.
and maybe he's also my student in a certain way.
Okay.
But that's just a little humor on the side. That's not the point.
Yeah.
I admire what he does, and I admire what my other siblings do. Baruch is a wonderful, unbelievable, heartfelt, great Farbringer and speaker. I have my two sisters. They're all great. But sometimes sisters are not going to be as competitive.
It's not the same as brothers. Yeah.
But if anything, we probably motivate each other. I am sure that if you asked him, he'd probably say sometimes he hears something from me that motivates him to be a little more competitive, and he'll excel even more. It's like two marathon runners.
Yeah.
And the same thing with my brother Baruch. But because, in a way, I came first, it's like they say in therapy, as the oldest sibling, you don't have to go to therapy for your younger siblings. They have to go to therapy for you because of you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they go to therapy because of me, because I don't think I was abusive and so on. But looking back, I remember my sister Chani once saying to me, I thought you were God when you were when I was like a young teenager. Because, the Rebbe's chayzer, and you'd come home and people, they honored you and respected you. And then I said, so what'd you learn? She learned, you're not God. I said, good, I'm glad, But
was there a point where you would say your I don't say like your head swelled a little bit as a teenager when this happened?
Maybe it's still swelling. I'm just sitting there. You're honoring me with such a interview with my dear mother. No, let's put it this way. We all have, I think I have a healthy ego, but I will say as well, my father used to always say, I asked him about ego. He says, egos are fine if your seichel is more than your ego. But if your ego is more than your seichel. So I hope my seichel is more than my ego.
Seichel meaning your
intelligence.
Your intelligence.
And also knowing the most important thing of all. I do what I do, not just because of, I definitely feel, I enjoy my work. I feel fulfilled. I affect people. That's very powerful. But above all, anyone doing such work, at least for me, I know I'm a channel. I was blessed. Many of my gifts were not earned. I was the right time in the right place. It wasn't like I went for a search for 30 years and I found the truth. I meet people who have gone through tremendous struggles. In my case, I was blessed in a beautiful home. I did not have to go. I didn't come to where I am through pain. Looking at many people today, which I once did not know, I was naive.
They got to where they got through suffering.
Some people are tremendous suffering. So I never take for granted that a lot of this was given to me. And I really feel, ultimately, what Chassidus teaches you is that you're only as great as what you're dedicated to. The Rebbe is my teacher, but it's more than just a teacher. I don't know who I would be today if it were not for him. Same thing with my parents, in a different way. So I always know and I'm always cognizant, even if I get a compliment and I feel good about it, that it's always something greater working through you. So that's how I feel. The Torah Meaningful Life has had tremendous impact on people.
Incredible.
But I always feel it was a gift that God allowed me to write it, gave me the skill to write, to reach people. And I always feel that, and I always tell people, if I affected you in some way, may you affect other people in the same way, because we're all links in a chain. I come from somewhere, and I go somewhere. Everybody is like a link in the chain.
Let me ask one question, also a sensitive question, but about kind of this distinction.
There's nothing off limits here.
About this
that.
distinction between a parent and a Rebbe. I want both of you to reflect on Gimel Tammuz. When the Rebbe passes away, what did you feel your role as a parent was vis-a-vis your children? And what did you feel like your role was as, the oldest of the siblings? And thinking about your other siblings, thinking about at that point, were there grandchildren in the picture in '94?
Yeah.
You had children of your own. Was that a time where families are kind of, because the Rebbe meant something else, to every family had their own story of how they came to the Rebbe and what their relationship was. When the Rebbe passed away and especially even leading up those final years, which were extremely difficult, I'm sure, when your whole world revolves around the Rebbe's leadership. As a parent, how did you process the passing of the Rebbe on Gimel Tammuz? And do you remember, reaching out to your own children?
I think we were in denial. It was very hard to believe that the Rebbe, who was...
Do you remember finding out the news, where you were?
Yeah, I was in my house, and my son called me.
Which son?
No, my youngest was in Boston,
Yeah.
in yeshiva, and he said there was a hookup that was always, since the Rebbe had the stroke, there was a hookup at the telephone that people could...
Beepers, I think, right? Beepers.
Yeah, but there was also on the phone. You could dial a number, and they would say, what's happening. So I was busy. I was doing so. I don't know what it was. It was 12 o'clock at night, and my son called me from there, and he said, I just heard they say Shema Yisrael. So I said, let me find out. And I did.
Who
And
did
I
you
said,
call? How do you find out?
Well, they sort of. All they had said was Shema Yisrael.
Okay.
They didn't say anything. So we knew what that meant, And I just you're in shock. And then after that, you're just really in denial because it's not like the Rebbe's in your house, but he's in you all the time. We live
presence, yeah.
with the Rebbe. It's not that
I understand.
It's not like we do everything like what would the Rebbe say? What the Rebbe we live with his power, with his energy, with what he gives us, to the strength to be who we are. So you can't just say, oh, it's gone, right? You just don't know what to do
with your
with
relationship
it.
to the Rebbe prior, would you ask the Rebbe parenting questions? Did you reach out to him ever about a parenting issue?
Just a little, not that much,
Do you remember anything specific? It's okay if you don't.
Nothing specific,
Okay.
because we also had personal. In my time, we could see the Rebbe.
You knew the Rebbe before he was the Rebbe.
That also, but
They
also,
went into Yechid, they went into personal, they had private
but
audiences.
we had private
Yeah.
audiences. Like right before my wedding, I went
Sure.
to see the Rebbe. In later years,
My
you
bar
got
mitzvah.
$1. You could also
Could see him.
So we did.
But you really
we had
had
like
that
a person. Yeah,
That's why. So your son calls you. You're in total shock. You're in denial.
and you just don't know what to do with it. You don't know what to do with it, really.
Do you try to comfort your child? Because your child also lost somebody.
I know. Well, he was coming in. He was going to drive in now that he found out what it was. So I don't know. Did we speak to each other? I
Tell
don't
me from
remember.
your
Okay,
perspective. Gimel Tammuz.
I don't
Yeah, yeah.
remember.
So
The
first
that.
Rebbe dies, and I'm asking this question because I'm trying to understand not how Chabad, a Hasidic movement, mourns the Rebbe or processes
Personally.
this. How does a family, and how does the family relate to one another? When a family loses somebody so close, we have Shiva, we have Shloshim, and you come together as a family. But over here, the Rebbe is not an actual member of your family. So I'm just curious how it played out and was processed on a
Very good.
familial
That's
level.
a good point. I think I would just say a few things. For me personally, because I was, an adult, I was already 35 years old when it happened, right? 35. This is 1994.
You had your
More.
children
I was
already.
37 years old. I was actually 37 years
Yeah.
old. And I had,
Your
for me,
parents-
and me in my case was also, Besides the Rebbe, on a personal level, I worked for him.
Yeah.
So my whole career came to an end. Not that mattered to anybody else.
Oh, that was
except
your
me.
job. Like
Yeah.
you,
So my whole life orbited around the Rebbe's talking, if he doesn't speak. So I already had 2 years of that, because the Rebbe had a stroke 2 years and a few months before that, in 1992. So I was already struggling for 2.5 years with repositioning my life, because it was so much around the Rebbe. So I had additional things. But I also was already a leader in a certain way. I don't like to use that word, but I mean, I had students. I was giving
Sure.
classes. I was looked up as a Rebbe, as a chayzer. I reviewed Farbrengens, I wrote. So I had additional responsibility, like not just to grieve personally, but to what's the message now? Could people turn to me for that? Like, what do we do now? And this was already, again, over 2 years, because even though the passing of the Rebbe was June 94, he had a stroke in February 92. And the Rebbe was no longer speaking. So the shock had begun earlier. This was a whole other level. I'm just giving you my context.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a little unique. So as far as my own family goes, you have to keep in mind, my family is a very secure family and very fiercely independent. Every one of my siblings, and my parents for sure, I knew had tools to process. Not that this was easy to process, but it wasn't like I felt that my family fell apart and we have to sit down and console each other. I knew everyone's going to work it through, because their lives were all driven by the Rebbe. So we definitely had conversations. I had with my younger brother Yitzchak and Baruch, and with all of them, with all my siblings. Not in any formal way. It's not like we said, let's meet but throughout that period in time. And I think we all shared one common feeling, that how tragic this is and how bad it is, we're all responsible to continue to teach the Rebbe's message. That was our biggest comfort. And we were all.
did you feel that even like you're on Gimel Tam?
Yeah, immediately. I felt that. Well, listen, there's the shock my mother told. Like any time a shock. But when things settle, so to speak, and you start, because 2 days after Gimel Tammuz, where was I? I was on Larry King and on Charlie Rose, Tuesday night. Gimel Tammuz happened Saturday night. Tuesday night, I was on 2 major live programs. Wasn't easy. I was very emotional, but I knew that was my responsibility. I had to do that. I had to bring the Rebbe to the world. That's why I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life. I knew one thing for sure. I was blessed with the ability to listen to the Rebbe and write his talks only for one reason, to bring it to the world. I always knew that. So this was, if not now, when?
But were you worried? I mean, you had a sibling who was 15 years younger than you. He was not 35. He was at the end of adolescence.
It's a good question. I honestly, in retrospect, I wasn't worried, because I felt just like I felt that if I can manage, he'll manage, even though he's only 20 years old. It's true. He was only 20, right? He was 22.
But he was also involved.
Sure.
So
Yeah, but still, he was in Boston. He was in yeshiva.
Gentle soul.
Yeah, I honestly did not feel so. I didn't feel that way personally, because probably maybe I wasn't the best brother. I wasn't like looking to take care of him.
Gotcha.
And he was in yeshiva and he was going through his things. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I didn't feel a particular need more to him than my other siblings. Let's put it that
Gotcha.
way. And we all, I knew everybody's in a vulnerable place. But I also had the confidence that we would get through this, and even now we talk about it at times. We still on the topic, like the Rebbe's. Remember, the Rebbe lives on through his teachings, and we all are involved in his teachings. Myself, or my brothers, my sisters. So in a way, it's still on the agenda. It's not like now. I'll just say this: when my father passed away 20 years ago,
Yeah.
so we sat shiva right here in this house, and there, in a certain way, it was similar, but here was obviously our own personal tragedy. So we, of course, compare notes, all the funny stories and all the stories about your father. My father was a very colorful individual. With the Rebbe, we continue to do that too. So I wouldn't call it maybe a process of grieving, but because the Rebbe's presence and his stories about him, it's. I don't know if you follow the WhatsApps and the texts and emails. Every time a new story of the Rebbe and this. So there's a certain living on of the Rebbe in our lives, which I think is a big part of keeping it, so it's not just a void and a vacuum. There's something And you see this with Chabad everywhere.
Yeah, this is actually my final question before we get to our rapid fires. What I really wanna land on is like this ultimate generational shift that has occurred specifically in the world of Chabad, which is, how do each of you see Chabad families changed from the generation you were raised in, each of you respectively, to the world right now? What do you think is the most unique struggle and opportunity that the current generation? Now, obviously, we don't have a living Rebbe in that same way. They're not growing up with the same experiences in all of that ways. But what do each of you see as the primary difference of what it means to grow up in the world of Chabad in 2025 versus the childhoods that each of you respectively had? And we'll start with the mama. These are your great-grandchildren.
And if you
already.
want me to start, to what you can think, and you can I could do that to whatever you.
I just want to say something, then you can start. I just want
go.
Yeah.
I'm not pushing it. I'll say it afterwards. It's fine. Just trying to relieve the pressure.
Again, in Russia, we were brought up to live with a Rebbe.
But you also you said you never saw a picture of the Rebbe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I gave an interview to somebody, and I mentioned what happened in Russia.
Yeah.
That we lived with a Rebbe all the time. Never having seen one, never having experienced anything with a Rebbe. Not a picture even. And yet we lived with a Rebbe. So people are so moved by that because they say that this generation is living that way. Because we always lived with a Rebbe. That's the whole idea.
But what do you see as the biggest distinction? You have grandchildren and probably now great-grandchildren who are growing up in this radically different world. What do you think is their biggest challenge and biggest opportunity?
The challenges I think there are a lot of challenges that we did not even in Russia, we didn't have such challenges. Because the outside world is so open, with the internet, with all the information that is abounds, the children many are getting really lost. I think they also, it depends on the families as well, but there's a lot of
distractions,
anxiety, and missing the idea of being close to a Rebbe, just getting it, vicariously from a different generation, from the parents and the grandparents, is sometimes not enough. But on the other hand, on the other side, there's so many people that are getting stronger and more passionate and more dedicated. It's an incredible thing. Well, you see what the shluchim are accomplishing with people who never even heard of a Rebbe, and how they're bringing people into Yiddishkeit with such passion and love, and that all comes from the Rebbe. So on the one hand, people who are missing the Rebbe are really in a difficult place, but on the other hand, the growth is just incredible, unbelievable. How is that possible? Only because it's unlimited passion. It's unlimited from Hashem, that every Jew has a neshama that is unlimited, and they're touching that part of the neshama in Jews and bringing them, and it's affecting the non-Jewish world as well, because the Rebbe was very much into affecting non-Jews, to spread the 7 laws.
Transform the whole world,
The 7
for sure.
Noahide laws. So people are working on that with so much passion and love, and it's affecting the whole world. I think a change everywhere I am. You feel the change.
I've said that the Rebbe kind of brought back this notion of common Judaism, of having a vision of Judaism that has the potential to reach the entirety of the Jewish people. I'm curious for you. You have children of your own. When you think of the differences generationally of the childhood you had and the world, what it means to grow up now in the world of Chabad. You could be 25 years old and you were born well after Gimel Tammuz. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities of this generation?
Okay, very good. I'll speak on a very personal note. being a natural skeptic, I have to say that even before Gimel Tammuz is the day when the Rebbe is passing, I had my Gimel Tammuz moment, so to speak, back in 1977. The Rebbe had a heart attack, the night of Shmini Atzeret, middle of dancing, right smack in the middle.
You were there?
Yes, I was 20 years old, 21.
And the Rebbe fell down?
Didn't fall, no. Turned very pale.
He sat down. Yeah.
He turned very pale, and then later we found out it was a very serious heart attack. He walked out of the shul, and for me it was a real, I would say, shock, because it was the first time I saw mortality touch the Rebbe, and he was always like this, beyond, never sick, never stopped anything. Nothing was ever canceled. Everything was like a I would call a Mayan Hamizgaber, an eternal wellspring. And so I had an existential crisis in a way, because I remember asking myself, and this was taboo. You couldn't say it to anyone. I asked myself, what's going on? I mean, we're all giving our lives to this man and his cause, Torah, of course, but the Rebbe. And what happens if God decides to take him? And here we are, hanging in the middle. I'm 21 years old. What am I going to do with my life? Is this like real, or is this was a nice party? And I have no one to talk to, so it was all internal. But long story short, I don't want to. But I think it's very vital to answer the question properly, because I take this question very seriously. And I remember reading a story then. I'm not going to go through all the details. It was a story of Shmuel Munkes, was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. And they were coming to arrest the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya,
Sure.
Story of Yutas Kislev. And the Alter Rebbe asked him, should I cooperate and allow myself to be arrested? And he said something very sharp to the Rebbe. He said, of course, because Mamonavshach, either or. If you're a Rebbe, nothing will happen to you. And if you're not a Rebbe, you deserve a bullet to your head. That's what he said, for taking away the pleasure of this world from so many Jews.
Who are following your instructions.
Yes,
and
exactly.
These...
And to me, it was such like a thunderbolt, such an epiphany. I said to myself, it's time to grow up. Yeah, you're 20, you're 21 years old. Are you only here when this is a party, when things are going well? If it's emes, it's emes no matter what happens. And if it's not emes, get out. Don't just come around when it's nice. I'll be there when everything is nice. The Rebbe had a heart attack. And yes, he's in danger. And anything could happen because we don't know God's plans. But man up, grow up. You're in or you're not in. This is what I said to myself. So I had a real moment.
As a 21-year, like you confronted the death of the Rebbe, so
the
to
possible,
speak.
Yes. And does that make him less real because it's not on your terms? In other words, he's only real when it's like nice, and there's and what happens, in life. And so the questions like of the Holocaust and all the setbacks Jews have, to me, came alive in my own little way. Obviously, I'm not a Holocaust survivor, and again, as I said before, I was blessed. But for me, existentially, this was a major, big crisis of faith. And I said, either you're in or you're out. And obviously, I made my choice. I was in, whatever happens. So when the Rebbe had a stroke years later, and it was 14 years later, actually, and then he passed away in Gimel Tammuz, however you explain it, not that it was less shocking and less painful, but existentially, I had no crisis at all.
Because you had the conversation with
I
yourself.
already had, yes. I'm in. Why? Because I'll tell you why. Because to me, the Rebbe was never a cult personality. I was not attached to his blue eyes and his charisma and his brilliance, which he had plenty of. I was attached to what he stood for. And I knew that he would say himself, it's not me. I'm bringing what my father-in-law brought, and what my father-in-law would say his father, all the way to Moshe. And Moshe would say, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messina, it's not me. Like Hashem says, who gives a man a mouth to speak? It's not Moshe. I don't need a speaker. I need you to just open your mouth and say my words. So to me, the Rebbe was a man of God, and God lives on, and therefore his tzaddikim live on. Obviously, I have a personal pain. I would love to be able to hear the Rebbe speak again and see him and experience him. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I mean, these were things were like life changing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not in any way minimizing. But that was not his emes. His emes is what he represented.
It's truth.
And that truth I embraced back in 1977. And I'm not going anywhere, So for me, the real difference between then and now, because I know not everybody is me. Some people do need that physical being.
Yeah.
And to be very honest, many people had a major problem because they don't have a physical Rebbe. To me, I still want a physical Rebbe for personal reasons, but not for ideological reasons, not for spiritual reasons, because he lives inside me right here.
Mm-hmm.
He does. I mean, everything I do, I'm driven, I'm passionate. I don't have a day that I don't wake up excited about my mission in life, all because it continues to
But
live.
how do you transmit that to your own children?
Okay, so I'm going to get to that.
Yeah.
So to me, I see the shift is that today we have no choice but to embrace that called the concept, because it was much easier. You saw a physical Rebbe. The Rebbe was a very charismatic individual.
Sure.
So that alone drew many people, and it was fun. Actually, it was a lot of fun. Simchas Torah was like a party. The
Yeah.
Rebbe would make with his hands. The whole place danced.
My father-in-law used to go. He
And-
lived in Crown Heights.
And you didn't need any avodah. You didn't need to do anything. You
Yeah.
just showed up, and you're dancing
Yeah.
on the Rebbe's wings. But I remember thinking to myself, I once said, when the light is shining, you don't see the cracks in the wall. So now the light has dimmed. Now, what do you stand for? That now cracks start appearing. I mean, cracks in us.
I understand.
So I realize that today the challenge, and that's very much what drives my work, is you have to show the personal relevance, the eternal significance of the Torah's message through the lens of the Rebbe. The Rebbe was a man of Torah. Torah Meaningful Life is exactly that. I wanted to capture the soul and passion of the Rebbe as much as one can do in words. Obviously, words are words. But we all know that the soul of somebody is in their words, like a song. So to me, the real challenge is more than ever. We didn't have to do this 35 years. 35 years ago, I could have told somebody, you want to come to 770, you'll have a nice experience. I can't tell them that today. They still have a nice experience, but it's not a Rebbe experience. So now we have no choice, but it has to be captured through the message. Like I was just talking to 500 students in the whole of Torah. It's one of the main yeshivas here. Mm-hmm. Literally Tuesday night, I gave a talk to them. And I said to them, and they never saw the Rebbe. And they're studying in the Rebbe's yeshiva. And they're all going to be shluchim and so on. They never saw physically. They were all born after 1994. They were all 20 years old.
Yeah.
So it's like 10 years after Gimel. But I said to them, but you have to connect to the message, and the most important thing has to be relevant to your life. Don't do it mechanically. There's no mechanical. It was easier to be mechanical 35 years ago because all you had to do was show up. You came to a sounding of the shofar of the Rebbe. You didn't need any work to make your heart melt. But today you can't do that. Today it has to become very personal. So for me, with my children, and frankly with everyone I meet, the challenge is I have to make it more relevant than ever because there's no shortcuts. There's no, come to Crown Heights for Tishrei or for Rosh Hashanah or for whatever. Mm-hmm. It still has a power to be here, but it's not. So to me, the challenge is how do you translate everything that the Rebbe embodied for me? And the reason I made the choice in 1977, the eternity. Larry King asked me this question 2 days after Gimel Tammuz. He said to me, these were his words. This was live TV.
Yeah.
And, Larry King was 30-second answers.
And he was in his prime then. That was prime Larry
And
King.
he said to me the following question. He says, I understand why everybody is grieving and saddened that the Rebbe passed away. But why are you shocked? He's 92 years old. People die. Everybody dies. Why are you so shocked that a man of 92 years old passed away? And I had to answer on the spot.
Yeah.
And I said, look, you have to remember, for us, the Rebbe embodies Torah. Torah lasted through the Holocaust, through the pogroms, through the Crusades, through the Middle Ages, through all the destructions, and was never touched by anything. It was always here. So when you think of the Rebbe as that, when you see mortality touch immortality, it's not just sad, it's shocking. That was my response. Spontaneous.
When you see mortality touch immortality, it's always shocking.
It's shocking because it
wasn't about a 92-year-old.
Yeah, and it's not about. And I'm not trying to. What the Rebbe represented was. Why do we say tzaddikim gambe misasam kruim chayim? Tzaddikim,
the
even in
righteous.
the righteous, even in their deaths, they're called alive. Why? Not because they're biologically alive,
Correct.
because their life is not a biological life. Their life is not based on a heart beating. Their life is
represent
as the Balatanya says, their life is ava and yira, love and reverence of God and faith. They embody that. That never dies. Just like when you love somebody, what you love about them never dies. It's sad. You still want it in a body. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dismissing that.
Yeah.
But so to me, the most important thing is to teach people what does the soul of the Rebbe represent. And that, when you connect to that, that is the challenge.
And that's
not
both
that
an
it's easy.
opportunity
It's not that
and a
easy because not
challenge.
everybody is so spiritual. Some people need something, like some people will tell me, yeah, but I need something to touch. I need something to hold
Tangible.
on. I said, you know what? It's true. We all need that, but you don't always get what you want, So you have to do the best with what you have. So I feel I did it with my children. I'm very proud. They're connected to this, and it would be interesting to hear how they would articulate it. I don't think everyone has the words. I have words. God was blessed, but some people don't have the words, but they have what we call the hergish. They have the feeling. The sentiment is there. That's my friend. That is
I am so grateful for you're so generous with your time, with your words, with your memories. I always wrap up my interviews with more rapid fire questions. And my first question is, I always love books. Books is a central part of 1840. I am curious because we're always talking about intergenerational divergence. Tell me your favorite book you remember reading as a child, having a parent introduce you. Your favorite book that your parent ever introduced you to.
I can't think of it, but you go ahead.
My mother, she saw that I was a voracious reader, so wisely, instead of telling me, read this, don't read that, she would feed me books.
Exactly. What was your favorite?
Well, I don't know about the favorite, but one of the books she fed me was called The Way of All Flesh.
The Way of All Flesh.
By Samuel Butler.
Okay.
And my mother told me these words. After you finish reading this book, you're going to hate your parents. So that was very intriguing to me.
Yeah.
Why would my mother give me a book to learn to hate her?
Yeah.
But it was very disarming and manipulative, now that I think about it. Anyway, I read the book. It's a secular book.
Yeah.
About a guy growing up in a crazy religious home. His mother was a fanatic. And they, brainwashed him and destroyed his life. And then, of course, how he finds enlightenment by escaping religion. This is the book my mother gives me to shape me into a person.
Do you recall this at all?
Of course.
Why did you give him that book?
I love that book.
Why?
Because you know what? It gave you an understanding of humanity. I said he started to hate his parents. But I said, you understand?
Exactly.
No,
I hated myself when I read the book as a parent. And I said, I wanted to understand that you can hate a parent when they're destructive.
I didn't hate my parents after that at all, because, on the contrary, actually, because what also, I don't know if that my mother gave it to me, but I learned from one of the things I learned from the back, the damage that religion can do when it's abusive and not presented in a healthy way.
It's so remarkable. Again, how old are you when
16, maybe?
That you're giving a teenager a book where the punchline of the book is somebody.
I don't think she would give it to the younger siblings
younger
after
generation.
me.
No,
With me, she thought.
I'm very moved by
that.
No, with me, she thought she has nothing to lose.
I would give No, it's not true. When I speak to his son.
Were you worried that he was going to go off? Be honest.
Absolutely not.
No.
Ever.
What do you mean? Because I never was on.
But I wanted to say something
Yeah.
that all my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. I have a great-granddaughter who's 22 years old.
Can I know?
Great-granddaughter.
Wow.
So she's going to be getting married. They're all so connected that it's just unbelievable. Just incredible.
Despite of you or because of you?
In spite of me. In spite of me.
My
I always say that when somebody said to me, how did you bring up such children? I said, it's in spite of me. I was a challenge to
She always
them.
gives credit to my father. Okay, look, it takes two to tango.
I'm a challenge to her. But again, about my husband, something very interesting what he said. He was so comfortable in his skin.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about
It
him.
made my mother crazy, by the way.
Because I was never comfortable with my skin at that age. when I was 20, 21.
You were more insecure?
19.
How would you describe?
I'm still insecure now. I don't sound like.
You don't sound like
I
it,
know.
no.
I know. I don't know why. I project.
What are you insecure about?
I don't understand. I don't know.
I think there's both sides.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Did you have a favorite book as a child? I just want to make sure that even you remember, even if your parents didn't give it, what was your favorite book growing up as a child, as a teenager? Did you have a favorite?
I don't remember because I really loved reading and I loved books that showed character. What's that book? Vanity Fair? Vanity
that's a
Fair was
great
my
book.
favorite as a teenager.
She also gave me that book, Vanity Fair.
Because it talks about personality.
It's really social philosophy.
I know, yeah.
It's not the magazine. It's a book.
Correct.
It's
I
a very
understand.
social philosophy, and for me, it was a book that also helped me understand, because he covers all the spectrum
So
of every
interesting.
community.
Yeah.
Like you have the manipulator.
Yeah.
You have the stupid guy everyone takes advantage of, the
Yeah.
wealthy one, this one, that. So you get the whole picture there. And then there's always this Rebecca Sharp,
And it's a
who half the world says she's a tzaddikus, she's great.
Yeah.
And half the world says she's a cruel person, And so you come away with the end of the book is great. The end of the book, Vanity Fair, says, vanitas in Latin.
Vanities and vanity.
Vanity,
Yeah.
like Hevel
Hevel
Havolim.
Shlomo Melech
Like,
said.
yeah,
Koheles.
like vanity vanitas. Now it's time to take our puppets and pack them up, and the show is over. Something like that.
It's a classic, you understand? So it's written so well, describing characters so personally.
Yeah, but it's a very mature book. You have to. It's not.
Yeah,
a,
it's a
I feel
mature
very
book.
connected to this because I am blessed. I did not grow up in a Chabad home, but I grew up in a home with a mother who loves books. My mother still goes to, she knows the librarians' names in the local library. She's always there with recommendations. My next question, rapid fire question. If somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to go back to school to get a PhD in any subject of your choosing, what do you think the subject and title of your PhD would be? What would you want to study?
Why don't you ask? Maybe the money would be used otherwise.
Yeah.
That you didn't ask. Okay.
What would you go back to school to study?
I love so many things that I have no idea. But literature is my passion.
Literature is your passion.
Yeah.
Well, physics and quantum mechanics was always my passion, but I wouldn't want to spend too much money because I could study it without money.
Yeah,
if you know what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
So
Same thing with that.
I'm thinking I would go back and try to write a doctorate on the convergence of psychology and spirituality. Create a new psychology for the world.
Wow.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And the world needs it. My final question, I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night and what time do you wake up in the morning?
Most mornings I wake up at 6:30, but I go to sleep late, 11, 12, sometimes 1 o'clock.
Nuh-uh. Still now.
Yeah.
You're a partier from the second we met. I just want you to know.
I'm a party
The thing I
animal.
love the best, I asked someone gave me your phone number, said reach out to my mother, you'll coordinate. He gave me the one date he's available in the next 2 weeks. I figured, okay, I will speak to, he'll be open the next 4 weeks. The first thing I said, okay, Tuesday, March 6th, I said, I have to get back to you. I have to check my calendar. I like someone who keeps active a calendar. You're unbelievable. Truly. I really mean that.
Yeah.
What time do you go to sleep at night and what time do you wake up
You're
in the
not going to
morning?
believe. I'm a very, I don't sleep a lot. My father was also that way. I can go 3-4 hours a night, just for the record.
For real?
Yeah.
So-
And it's just my metabolism. I have a lot of adrenaline. So usually 1 or 2 a.m. and maybe by 6:30, 7, I'm awake.
To the Jacobson family, Simon, Mrs. Jacobson, Mommy, Sylvia, thank you so much. What a pleasure and privilege for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you. 1840 is the Industrial
thank my
Revolution. The
Tough
year
Reish.
Tough Reish. The Zohar says that's when the explosion begins.
That's what the
Of
explosion.
knowledge above and knowledge below.
That's what we're trying to do. And it's
So,
the beginning of Ishbitz
Right.
began.
And I commend you for using the airwaves and to bring the message to the world. It's a real honor to be here.
Thank you so
My
much.
mother.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.